So what is going on, guys? It's Triple G here, back with another Diablo 4 video. In today's video we're going to be talking about this Ice Sorceress build that makes you absolutely unkillable during the entire campaign. Will get you to level 50 and get you to the place where you want to be, which is where all the good loot is. So if you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to the channel or join me over on Twitch. I stream 6 times a week, so otherwise let's get straight into this video. So as you can see from the footage here, this is an Ice Sorceress build. It has an unbelievable amount of survivability, and in addition to that we deal a shit ton of damage, to put it mildly. So don't worry guys, this isn't a video where I'm going to tell you absolutely need to find the best gear and the perfect rolls possible. You actually only need to find a couple of items and it will carry you all the way through the story and level 50. And in fact, I beat the final boss and got to level 50 with just level 20 items. So the first thing we're going to touch on is the aspects. Now the aspects are very, very important. If you didn't know, whilst completing the story you will go through dungeons. These dungeons will unlock aspects for your characters. Now different dungeons have different aspects for each of the classes, so you want to be looking out for the sorcerer ones. Now the really critical one you're looking for is this one. It is the Ice Shards pierce 3 times, dealing 25% less damage per subsequent enemy hit. This will allow you to crowd control from the get-go. This is really, really important. Will allow you to just blast through the story while those enemies are really weak, and you will still be using this at level 50 and beyond. Then when it comes to other aspects, we're going to be looking for things that add bonuses to frozen, chilled damage, and we're also going to be looking for anything that gives us a barrier. So as you can see here, we have whilst not healthy, it's going to give us a barrier and make us immune. We have another one here, which is while you deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable. Now vulnerable is going to be a keystone thing for what we're going to do here. Everything's going to be vulnerable, so we need to make sure that we have the most damage possible for vulnerability. Another key aspect here is damaging elite enemies will give us a barrier, as we've touched on here. Ice armor makes you unstoppable. This item I found on World Tier 3. Enemies that die whilst frozen will have a 17% to release another Frost Nova, which will in turn start making people vulnerable. And the final thing that you're going to want to put on your two-handed staff, because it gets bonus damage, is when you freeze an enemy, there is a 70% chance that they will become vulnerable for 3 seconds. As I said earlier, we're going to want to make people vulnerable as fast and as often as possible. So when it comes to the skill tree and your leveling, there is no real right way to do it. The advice I can give you is make sure that you pick up all the abilities that we go through here as fast as possible, and then get some of the subsequent abilities like bonus frost damage, bonus cold damage, bonus barrier duration when you start to get past all the abilities. Once you've got all the way down to the bottom of the tree, then start filling them out. So we're going to take it by branch to make sure you get everything, but bear in mind the order can be changed depending on what works for you and what gear that you actually find whilst playing Diablo. So we're going to be using Frostbolt here. We never really use our primary basic attack, so that is something to bear in mind when you see bonus damage on your cards, on your items. We're never really going to be using this. You might use it in the first 10 or 20 levels, but after that we're going to be holding that square button down for eternity. We're going to put a point in here that's going to give us 15% chance to explode on chilled enemies, which will then give us a chance to spread that chill as well as spreading vulnerability. And then we're going to make Frostbolt makes frozen enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. This will just mean that if you do get stuck without mana, you can make someone vulnerable without having to use your mana, and then you can follow when your mana has regened. On to the next tree, and the most important skill in this entire build is Ice Shards. If you find gear with bonus Ice Shards on, absolutely put this on. So you're going to be wanting to put a full spec in here, and then we are going to want to put Ice Shards have a 40% chance to ricochet, which is very, very, very good. They will always ricochet off frozen enemies as well, which will allow us to crowd control. Then the most important skill in the entire tree, Greater Ice Shards. While you have a barrier active, casts of Ice Shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. This is super, super important, because if everybody is frozen, we get bonus damage, and we're going to be leaning into that heavily. So this is an absolute necessity. The sooner you can get this on your build, the better. In the next tree, we're going to be picking up Ice Armor. This will give us a barrier, which means that the more barrier we have, the more damage we will do to frozen enemies, and we're going to be freezing people all the time. So just a couple of points in here just to get that barrier going, but we are going to get enhanced ice armor, which will give us mana regeneration, and we're also going to get shimmering ice armor, which means that enemies hit while your armor is active have a 15% chance to become frozen for 3.25 seconds, meaning more damage for us. We're also going to be taking Frost Nova. Now, this is like one of the go-to skills. This is a guarantee that we're going to make people vulnerable whilst we're doing this. It's like a Frost Nova. So you're going to be wanting to dodge into enemies, smashing that Frost Nova down, and then piling out your ice shards. And those will ricochet between all the other enemies. So we're going to be maxing that out. We're also going to be taking Enhanced Frost Nova, which will mean killing enemies frozen by a Frost Nova reduces its cooldown, which is very, very important. And then Mystical Frost Nova. Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable, and this is for 6 seconds against bosses. Now, you might be thinking, well, hold on, Trip. This is all about crowd control. How do we do single point damage? But I'll show you later on in the footage that you are going to be able to do that. So the next section we're going to touch on is the Conjuration. Now, we're only going to put 1 point into Ice Blades here. Now, this is so that every time we cast, we're going to be getting a barrier, which we touched on earlier we need. So we're going to be casting Ice Blades just so our bar across the bottom is full, and we will get that bonus barrier. We're also going to be using the cooldown here, especially when it's used against vulnerable enemies. And then finally, we're going to use Summoned Ice Blades, which has a 20% of Enhanced Ice Blades cooldown, is applied to the other skills, which gives us some cooldown reduction. And as you'll see here, we have some points in here. Like I said earlier, get these points a little bit later, but we will touch on those first. Make sure you focus on going down the tree. So we're going to take Align the Elements, which means we're going to gain 1% damage reduction against elites for each second that we haven't taken damage from one. And then we've got 3 points in Protection. So using a cooldown guarantees 30% of your maximum life as a barrier. Again, we want barriers. That's where our damage is. Then into this next section, we're not actually going to be taking any of the skills here, but we are going to be focusing on this section here. Again, revisit this section once you've got all your skills, but we're going to be taking Icy Veil, which means your barriers have a 15% chance of increased duration, which is very good for us. We're going to be also have Cold Front, which is while you have a barrier active, you apply 24% more chill. And then finally, we're going to have Snap Freeze here. Now, this is going to mean that Frost skills have a chance of 3% to instantly freeze people, which is very, very good for us. Next up, we're going to be taking Deep Freeze. Now, Deep Freeze is very, very good for crowd control. We're basically going to run into the middle and drop this on us. This will mean that we'll be completely immune, so we can use it as a bit of a panic button as well, and it will chill enemies all around and eventually freeze them as well. It will also give them a little bit of a Nova towards the end. Then we have Prime Deep Freeze here, which is when Deep Freeze ends, gains a 10% of your base life as a barrier. Again, barriers here, you can see where we're going. And then finally, Supreme Deep Freeze is when Deep Freeze ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%. Cooldowns, more skills, more damage, more barriers, etc., etc. Then there is a section here that I recommend filling in the end, but we'll just touch on it now. Permafrost means Frost skills will deal a 15% increased damage to elites. We have Hoarfrost here, which you will deal 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% increased damage to frozen enemies, which is exceptional for our build. 3 points into Icy Touch, which means you'll deal 12% increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies. And finally, Frigid Breeze, which will give us cold damage against vulnerable enemies, has up to a 20% chance to generate 15 mana. Now, when it comes to the key passives, we're going to be selecting Shatter. After Freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of the damage you deal to them while frozen. This means that we will have an ultimate amount of crowd control. We aren't going to be taking Avalanche. I did try it, but it didn't quite work as well as I would have expected. Now, when it comes to skill assignments, you can put these skills across whatever you want to do, however you feel comfortable in using. But we're going to quickly touch on the enchantments. Now, the enchantment I chose here is that Ice Shards will automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. This is brilliant because our Ice Shards are already treating people as frozen, so they will bounce automatically through, giving you some kind of autonomous crowd control, meaning that you can actually just jump into a bunch of enemies, hit that Nova, and they will kill themselves without you having to use any of your mana whatsoever. The second one is the Frost Nova enchantment as well. Your conjuration skills have up to a 30% chance to unleash a Frost Nova themselves. So remember, we've got Ice Blades growing around the field, killing autonomously and attacking autonomously. So every time that they hit something, they will unleash potentially a Frost Nova. And then the modifier as well, Frost Nova will also make vulnerable for for 6 seconds. That's our key skill there. Now, when it comes to the playstyle is really simple. We want to be getting right into the middle of the enemies, and we want to be using as much of our barrier skills as we can. Now, every time we use a skill, we're going to be getting a barrier, but some of those barriers last longer than others. So work out a rotation that works for you. What I usually do is dodge in there, get myself a Nova, make everybody vulnerable, wait for the autonomy to kill most of them, follow up with some mana, then put myself another barrier on, and then start to use other skills as well. As you can see from the footage, we absolutely decimate mobs. This is actually world tier 3. I wanted to show you that whilst this is a leveling build, you still have a ton of damage to be able to go through these higher world tiers and start farming gear. In fact, the story, when I finished at level 50, I jumped straight into world tier 2 and completely unlocked world tier 3 immediately with this very build, while still having level 20 item gear on. As for boss damage, the same theory goes. You want to be going in there and making sure that you're rotating your barriers, which will keep your damage potential up. Now, bear in mind that Deep Freeze and Frost Nova will work down the boss's stamina bar, and if you time it correctly with your Frost Nova, then you can hit that Frost Nova just as he's about to stamina. You'll get your full damage potential, and you have a huge amount of damage for what is World Tier 3 here in this footage to be able to just melt bosses. This worked on and whatever boss that I fought, whatever World Tier that I have fought so far, and it is seriously good, particularly for solo. The final thing I would like to touch on is the fact that we did mention at the start of this video, this was an unkillable sorceress build. I actually only died once in this entire story playthrough, and that was because I ran into the butcher. I didn't get close to dying any other time in my entire duration of playing. Guys, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel for more Diablo videos in the future, or join me over on Twitch. I stream 6 times a week, and otherwise I'll catch you on the flip.